Axis commanders mocked America's tiny Jeep the moment they saw it. Until this little machine climbed mountains their trucks couldn't touch, outran their armored cars, carried soldiers through hell, and became the single most unstoppable vehicle of World War II. When the very first prototype of America's Jeep rolled into the Army testing grounds in 1940, the officers who gathered around it weren't impressed. It was small, almost comically small. Just a flat hood, straight lines, no doors, no armor plating, no roof, nothing fancy at all. A few commanders wondered quietly if this was really what America planned to send into a world already on fire. Nations were producing monstrous armored carriers, towering transports, and heavy off-road trucks. Meanwhile, the United States showed up with something that looked like a farm tool on wheels. But the engineers said, "Just wait." And waiting didn't take long. The moment they fired the engine and told the driver to push this little machine to its limits, everything changed. The Jeep lunged forward like a hungry animal. It didn't bounce, it didn't drag, it didn't stall. It soared. It climbed hills shaped like walls, dug through mud like it had claws instead of tires, ripped through potholes big enough to break normal vehicles in half, and slid across terrain that was less ground and more enemy attempt to stop anything from passing. Officers who were shaking their heads a minute ago were now leaning in, jaws half open, watching this little thing fly across the test field like it was born to do the impossible. Across the ocean, Axis Command was confident, too confident. Their heavy transports were mechanical beasts built for intimidation, not agility. They assumed mobility meant size, power, and weight. They believed a bigger machine would always win. So when they heard whispers of a strange, tiny American car capable of extreme mobility, most German officers dismissed it with arrogant laughter. A few intelligence reports described an open mini-truck being produced in massive numbers. German commanders joked that Americans were going to war with toys, but toys don't change world history. The Jeep did. When the United States officially entered the war, Jeeps were shipped out faster than almost any other vehicle. They appeared in North Africa first, riding through sandstorms under the blazing desert sun. Axis supply convoys struggled constantly. German and Italian trucks were heavy and sank deep into the dunes, their engines overheating, their wheels spinning helplessly. But the Jeep, it danced on the sand. Its light frame floated where heavier vehicles drowned. American and British patrols zipped across the desert at high speed, covering ground enemy forces thought impossible. They would appear behind German camps, strike fast, vanish into the dunes, and leave commanders furious and confused. How was this tiny vehicle outperforming entire supply lines? At night, when temperatures dropped and desert winds cut like knives, Jeeps kept running. Mechanics joked that if you took the entire Jeep apart, mixed the pieces into a barrel and shook it hard enough, it would reassemble itself. Soldiers trusted it with their lives. They strapped weapons to it, mounted machine guns on it, even laid wounded comrades across the back seats and used it as a battlefield ambulance. No one cared that it had no doors, no armor, no comfort. It was pure survival on wheels. Then came the mountains. The real test. Italy's slopes were brutal, narrow mountain passes, slippery stone roads, unpredictable turns, cliffs that swallowed anything that made one mistake. German commanders were confident their vehicles were designed for rugged European terrain, but even they struggled on Italy's high-altitude roads. Supply chains slowed, trucks skidded, engines overheated, axles snapped. The mountains punished anything mechanical, but the Jeep thrived. American ski troops, mule teams, infantry squads, they all relied on the little machine that climbed hills like a mountain goat. Soldiers pushed it, pulled it, and sometimes even lifted it to help it over stone ridges. And every time it kept going. Soldiers used it to deliver ammo to frontline units perched on cliffs. They used it to scout enemy positions on high ridges. They used it to rescue the wounded by driving down slopes so steep that officers refused to look at them directly. German troops watched from their bunkers in disbelief. How could something so small fight gravity like that? As Allied forces pushed north, into the dense forests and muddy fields of Europe, the Jeep became even more essential. Rain turned the roads into liquid chaos. Snow buried entire villages. The ground froze so hard that boots cracked. But when supplies needed to move, when wounded men desperately needed evacuation, when commanders needed instant communication between units spread across miles of danger, the Jeep answered every call. At times, it felt less like a machine and more like a living thing with a beating heart. One of the Jeep's greatest strengths was its simple design. It wasn't built with complicated parts or over-engineered systems. It was made for war, fast repairs, quick fixes, minimal tools. Soldiers joked that if a Jeep broke down, you could fix it with three things: a wrench, a cigarette, and whatever courage you had left. Many Jeeps running in Europe had been stitched together from parts of 2 or 3 wrecked models. They were Frankenstein machines that refused to die. In France, after the D-Day landings, Jeeps became the nerve system of the Allied advance. They sped through narrow village streets, across fields still smoldering from gunfire, over rubble, past burning farmhouses, always pushing forward. Commanders used them as mobile HQs. Photographers used them to capture the liberation. Even generals, including Eisenhower, called the Jeep one of the most important weapons of the war. Not a tank, not a bomber, a Jeep. But the Pacific Campaign was where the Jeep proved its heart. Jungles were nightmares of mud, roots, humidity, insects, and terrain that seemed intentionally designed to destroy machines. Japanese forces built defenses deep into thick vegetation, believing nothing could reach them. But American troops did, because their Jeeps carved paths where there were none. They crossed streams, climbed hills coated in moss, squeezed between bamboo, and pushed through mud as if they were made for it. Soldiers relied on them not just for mobility but for survival. Jeeps carried medicine, ammo, rations, and exhausted troops through terrain that broke stronger machines. Enemy forces eventually realized the truth. They weren't just fighting America's soldiers. They were fighting America's engineering. They saw Jeeps everywhere, on beaches, in forests, at river crossings, racing across airstrips, hauling artillery, dragging aircraft, pulling wounded men to safety, carrying radio units through gunfire, delivering hope in the darkest moments of war. What made the Jeep unbeatable wasn't size or power. It was heart. It was reliability. It was the fact that when everything else failed, the Jeep still kept going like it understood the stakes. Soldiers trusted it more than some commanders. They decorated it, painted names on it, treated it like a brother in arms. And when the war finally ended, Jeep production numbers told the story no enemy commander wanted to believe. Over 640,000 Jeeps had been built. They had crossed deserts, mountains, jungles, beaches, snowfields, and battlefields. They had delivered victory not by force but by endurance. Axis Command had mocked the Jeep. They saw it as a toy. But by the end of the war, that tiny American vehicle had conquered every terrain the world threw at it, and helped the Allies win one of the greatest conflicts in human history. If you want more powerful and untold WWII stories like this, hit like, subscribe, and comment more Jeep stories. So YouTube pushes this video to more history lovers. Your support keeps this channel alive.